Online? We're good? Okay. Hi everybody. Welcome to the second annual TBC United Webcast and Fundraiser here in Pittsburgh, North Carolina, and broadcasting live across
From
the web.
Sweet Bee Theater and Center for Arts.
I'm Beth Carrison, co-founder of TBC United, and this is
Dr. Jennifer Platt, also co-founder of TBC United.
And so we have a great lineup here tonight that we want to go over with you. We'll give you a little rundown on what's going to happen, where we've been, and then we'll go ahead and get started. So tonight we have we're going to be discussing some updates regarding alpha-gal syndrome. You may remember last year we had a great video. Please visit tbcunited.org to get a little rundown of last year's video. Star Eye, we'll be discussing that. Lyme, the history of Lyme in North Carolina. And tick testing and tick tracking. Very exciting tonight. And so, our lineup, what we're doing here tonight is just a perfect illustration of what TBC United's mission is all about, which is to educate, provide education, awareness, and advocacy for healthcare providers, organizations, and the general public.
And before we start, we really want to give a huge thanks to everybody who has helped get us to this point tonight. And that has been a lot of people. So first of all, we want to thank our very small but mighty board, which is chaired by Dr. Tina Merritt, who is also one of our speakers tonight, as well as Dr. Heather Zerlong, also one of our speakers this evening. And then we have Josh Miller and Harold Carrison. We'd also like to thank our sponsors and our donors that are contributing to TBC United. Our sponsors include Northwest Arkansas Asthma and Allergy, Piedmont Urgent Care, which is here in Chatham County, Amarillo Hills, Fair Game Beverage, and of course Tick Warriors. And I should note, as some of you probably know, I'm also the CEO and founder of Tick Warriors. And what has happened is, over the past 3 years, we just celebrated our 3rd birthday on Monday. Over the past 3 years, it's been incredibly obvious more and more that there's such a huge need for education. Everywhere we go, people need and really want to understand more about ticks and the conditions that they're causing. So that's why we decided to co-found together, Beth and I, Tick-Borne Conditions United, and especially to work on educating healthcare professionals. So that's our main mission. But by supporting Tick Warriors, it's, we're sister companies, so we like to tag team wherever we can. Tick Warriors gives a portion of its proceeds to Tick-Borne Conditions United, which in turn allows TBC United to do education for all of these events that we're out and about doing.
So with that regarding donations.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry.
Gotta stay on cue what we're doing here. It's tough live, right?
That's right. Supporters, friends, colleagues, of course, that we want to thank. Everybody that was involved in producing the show this evening. I know that you're just watching us on YouTube, some of you, and some of you are here in the audience, but this takes a lot of work behind the scenes to make this happen and to make all these people show up on the screen behind us. So we'd like to thank them and also thank the employees that are working for Tick Warriors to help make everything happen behind the scenes as well. So with that, we do want to also note about our donors. Our 2019 donors will be forever imprinted into our founder circle, depending on how much money you decide to give.
Yeah. And so what are the different levels we have?
We have egg, larva, nymph, and adults.
So forever educating.
Right. That happens to be the life cycle stages of a tick, in case you didn't know that.
Mm-hmm. So now that we've gotten these formalities out of the way, we'd like to talk about what we've done since we've started this venture, which has been quite a bit. We've had quite a road trip this past year, which started with, really the whole genesis started back when the Federal Advisory Committee Tick-Borne Disease Working Group was formed by Congress under the 21st Century Cures Act, and which their mission was to oversee the gaps and overlaps for all the research going on in the country and the way the funding was going towards it. And so that's where it really all started was, when we were talking with them and trying to get heard and get alpha-gal included in the conversation, it just really inspired us to move forward and formalize a nonprofit, because we realized the experts overseeing the experts really weren't really well versed in alpha-gal syndrome, and several other conditions just were not included in the US funded research. So we were very inspired to help push that movement along.
And I would say especially conditions that are prevalent here in the southeastern United States, southern United States in general. That's one of the things that's really on our radar, is to help increase awareness of those conditions, the lesser known conditions. Even though they're lesser known, doesn't mean they're lesser debilitating. We have all kinds of stories about people that are being underdiagnosed, misdiagnosed, not treated sufficiently. So there's a lot of disability and loss of quality of life that's happening, and that's one of the things that we really want to help change.
So that theme has run through all over the country, everywhere we've been, from scientific conferences to patient-centered conferences to physician-focused conferences, ranging from Rhode Island, Maine, New Hampshire, New York, Virginia, North Carolina here, Colorado. Everywhere we've gone, the stories are incredible, and that's what really keeps us motivated, even when planes aren't landing on time and so forth.
What Beth won't tell you is that a great example of recent conference presentations is that she was invited to speak on alpha-gal syndrome, which, as you may know, she does have. She was invited to speak on that recently at the Mid-Coast Lyme Disease Education and Support Conference up in Maine, and there were several people that came to the conference especially to hear about alpha-gal syndrome, because what's happening is, and we've started noticing this on various Lyme disease support groups, is there's an undercurrent of people who have been diagnosed with Lyme disease that are realizing that they too have an aversion or inability to consume red meat or be exposed to mammal ingredients and products. So there's this, we don't know exactly what's going on, but there's also some very leading research that you can find a blog about on our website, that they have located the alpha-gal carbohydrate in the saliva of both the Lone Star tick but also the black-legged tick, and I think Tina's going to talk about that in a little bit. But the bottom line is that there are people in the Lyme community that are having problems, they're not getting better, and there's just this complicated mishmash of, do they have Lyme and they got alpha-gal, did they get them at the same time? Do they maybe have alpha-gal syndrome that was misdiagnosed as Lyme because of the presence of a bullseye rash, which sometimes, up until recently, the CDC said if it was a bullseye rash, it should be diagnosed with Lyme disease. So you can see these things are very complicated, and we are constantly striving to help increase awareness and understanding. And we saw that in action at the conference in Maine, where people were coming up to Beth and saying, oh my goodness, I've had this problem and I didn't understand that it could be something else in addition to Lyme disease.
Yeah, and and it's difficult because there's no ICD code right now for alpha-gal, and there's a lot of misconceptions that you're allergic to all of the mammal meats, which you are technically. That is how you're diagnosed, and that is the proper explanation. But we all react differently to the different mammalian meats. So it just makes it that much more complicated. So the good news is out of all of these different conferences that we've been to, we've had a lot of great opportunity falling out after those conferences from the dinners with microbiologists and the scientists and the physicians and the advocacy groups that attend the conferences, asking for more information and following up with us long after the conferences. So we've made a lot of great connections, educating a lot of doctors. Jennifer won't tell you that she had the opportunity on behalf of TBC United to go and speak to the North Carolina, the Blue Cross Blue Shield Nurses Association of North Carolina, and they were riveted with just all the information, and they just walked out of that going, wow, we need to know more, obviously. So a lot of great stuff that we've been doing, I think, and it's been quite a ripple effect, so we want to continue that. So thank you for your support in attending this and sharing the information and all the donations that we've received.
And I think with that, that's going to roll us into our first speaker. It is only very fitting that we lead this evening of presentations off with a presentation by Dr. Marcia Herman-Giddens, who is, I can't even begin to do justice to him. I mean, she's just been in this arena for years and years and years in North Carolina, and she has an incredible knowledge of ticks and the diseases that they're carrying in this state that goes back decades. She has her master's and doctorates in public health, but she's also a PA, so she's got a full realm of understanding both medically and public health wise of ticks and their impacts. And so she's going to talk to us tonight about the history of Lyme disease in North Carolina.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you.
I wish I knew as much as you made it sound like. I'm dependent on this little screen to see my slides, and so I need to wait until I see this first slide come up. I'll go ahead and explain it. The title slide has a graph on the left that is out in a very new paper, but it's just a neat schematic because when you get to see it, you'll see how the colors are changing. It represents all the states, and as the colors get paler, more orange, the amount of Lyme disease is increasing. But I can't go on until I see the slide because I don't have it all in my head.
And then I go back to how many moving parts are a part of this webcast, and
I'd like to say, we're waiting for that. There's been a lot of questions about whether or not this will be shared afterwards. There'll be an edited version of some of this, so please wait for that. You will see that on tbcunited.org. It will be linked there, as well as on our Facebook pages. You can follow us on Facebook, TBC United, Twitter, TBC United 2018, and LinkedIn, TBC United. So, and if anybody has any questions for us or comments, you can always email Jennifer or I at beth@tbcunited.org or jennifer@tbcunited.org.
Did you send me that slideshow?
Mm-hmm.
What was the title of it?
Something about Lyme disease in North Carolina, the history of Lyme disease in North Carolina.
I don't have that one.
I sent it yesterday.
Thanks for your patience, everyone.
Well, I'll go ahead and start talking about
that'd be great.
one historical issue that is, the graphic isn't that important, about ticks in general.
That's mine.
I'm
That's
sorry.
Someone's.
That's not it.
That's mine. Tina Merritt.
Give me a second. I'll move that one over here. Let's see. There's only one left.
Should go on.
Yeah.
About ticks in general in North Carolina. I've lived in this area for 50 years, so
I've got
I
7
know
pages.
not only from reading the medical articles, but from my own experience. When I first moved to this area, Orange County, Chatham County, there were, the only tick that anyone ever saw or ever had to be concerned about was the American dog tick, and of course it was the vector of Rocky Mountain spotted fever. Since then, they have gotten scarce, possibly partly because of the products now that are so good for pets. And the Rocky Mountain spotted fever has become diluted, evidently, with other related forms of bacteria. So that is not as much of an issue as it used to be, although it is still a very serious issue. There is a woman in Chatham that I have met whose sister died last year from Rocky Mountain spotted fever. But what happened is that as it went on, 50 years ago, there were virtually no deer in this area. And people that are younger and come into the area don't realize that things were not always this way. They're not like they are now. Now we have 5 species of ticks, well actually 6, because the Longhorned Tick that's just invaded the United States is in North Carolina, and is this history of one person has been bitten by that tick in Winston-Salem. So we have 6 ticks, 5 of whom are known to transmit certain diseases. So it's been a big change in those 50 years. And what happened was the deer, for example, in Chatham, there were no deer at all, and the Wildlife Commission brought in a herd of deer I think in the late 50s for hunters. Now they probably would have come anyway eventually, but it didn't help. So now everyone knows you can't have a garden, you can't do anything, there's so many deer. And the black-legged tick, which is the Lyme disease tick, of course, and the Lone Star tick, which vectors quite a few diseases, and alpha-gal, rely on deer for breeding. They need a large mammal to overwinter, so the females need a large blood meal. They mate with the males, they drop off, they lay their eggs, and before there were deer, there were very few. It just wasn't a problem at all. So that's something that's important to understand, that you can explain to people so they know that things were not always this way. And kids could go out and play all day in the woods and not, if they came in, you did check, you ran your fingers through their hair and you checked for the dog tick, which is a big tick. Another thing is the juvenile stages of the Lone Star tick and black-legged tick will bite people. The American dog tick, that does not happen, so it's only a big tick. So I'm trying to remember what else was on some of the other slides. Of course, they're lightning presentations because there were only about eight slides. So I can tell you this, when I first became, back when I was in pediatric practice in the late 70s, 80s, and early 90s, we had just begun to hear about Lyme disease. And there was a window in that period of time that people were beginning to understand about the so-called bullseye rash, which incidentally is a very bad term because the science has shown that the rash is usually solid red. That was indicative of Lyme disease. So there was this window in North Carolina, anywhere. There was no dogma that Lyme disease wasn't in the South. It was just if a person got a tick bite and they had a rash, spreading rash, they got treated. They got diagnosed with Lyme and got treated. Now, whether they really had Lyme or not, who knows? Now we know that there's Starry, that we're going to hear about from Dr. Sloan, that the Lone Star tick transmits, and symptom-wise and the rash and so forth, you can't tell. People could get sick from Starry. They do get sick from Starry. So then that window closed as science learned more about Lyme disease, and it became associated with the fact that most people support that the Lone Star tick cannot transmit Lyme disease. It has to be the black-legged tick. And more became known about it, then it got much trickier about trying to make a diagnosis, trying to make a decision about whether to treat or not, and that window left. And then there was a period of time around in there that there was a sort of a mantra that in the South there was no Lyme disease. I'm sure everyone has heard that. And when our organization started, we started in 2005, there were a lot of people are familiar with Dr. Jemsik. You've heard about him. The medical board called him up for hearings in 2006 because there was a concern that he was reporting too many cases of Lyme disease. there was a concern that there weren't real Lyme disease, and that there were some patients being mistreated and getting infections from IV treatments and so forth. So there were hearings, and at that hearing, the state public health official said, quote, because I was there, I heard it, Lyme disease is rare in North Carolina. And it couldn't particularly be refuted because there were no good data. And meanwhile, when you look back at the old maps, which is coming to my head from one of my slides, interestingly, some of you may not know, the state had a unit, they called it a unit, that researched ticks. There were 3 entomologists that were very good. And there was a lot of research going on from about year 2000 on, because the public was beginning to complain about ticks. And there were maps. They found the black-legged tick, Scotus scapularis, was in North Carolina even in the late 1800s. A lot of people still say it wasn't in the South. Actually, the scientists think it started in the South and probably migrated to the North. So it's always been here. It's never been here in the numbers that we have. The Lone Star tick was not here at all, basically, and the deer changed all that. So by the mid-2000s and on to 2010, it began to be recognized and known that the tick was here. Some of them were carrying the Lyme disease bacteria, Borrelia burgdorferi, and people were getting Lyme disease. And by 2011, the state put out a memo. Well, actually, by 2009, the Wake County was declared endemic for Lyme disease, because the CDC changes the definition of all of the tick-borne diseases fairly often. Which, one thing is important to remember, that means you can't really compare case numbers very well because the definition has changed. There was a period of time from, I think it was 2011 to 2017, that a county could be declared endemic with very, very strict criteria. And North Carolina had gotten 6 counties endemic and about 8 or 10 with one case that was on the way to being endemic. And
You found your slides, Mike.
oh,
We found the slides.
1 minute left.
I've got 1 minute left.
Which
Yeah.
one do you want?
I
Is
guess
there
go
any-
towards
do you
the
wanna
end,
talk?
I guess. So in 2011, the state, well, that's about the definitions, because you'll all have, and the people watching this will have the slides to study. I mean, you can study them later. So, okay, stop there, please. So this is in 2011, the state said, they put out a memo, historically, it was once thought that Lyme disease could not be acquired in North Carolina. This is no longer a true statement. That was huge because of the dogma that the South didn't have Lyme disease and North Carolina didn't have Lyme disease. So, okay, so we can go on. Does he change them? How do we change them? It's not quite. Okay, can you go to the next slide, please? Okay, these are maps. That one's fuzzy. I'm sorry, I can't help it. But and part of the dogma also was if the Lyme disease was diagnosed in North Carolina, it was because the person had traveled to the northeast and gotten it. That was before the endemic criteria that proved that you could get it in North Carolina. So the map on the right is 2017. That one on the left is 2008 to 2012, and you can see this is counties that have ticks, black-legged ticks. And then go to the next slide, please. Very quickly. The map on the left is our map, Tick-Borne Infections Council, that we had drawn up to show the endemic counties. Unfortunately, the CDC got rid of that diagnosis. A lot of states in the South were meeting the criteria and they had endemic counties, but now they are gone. So you can't get this kind of information anymore. Next slide, please. The next slide?
Yeah.
Okay, that's the last. I thought I had one before that, maybe not. That's actually no. Okay. That's it then, and I'm perfect with time. Yeah, so that's my last slide, and people, again, you can study that, and I would like to point out, which Dr. Sloan may too, that there are no data on starry. People are always asking, and you'll find out why, I'm sure. So we don't know. But if you look at the map on the right, now instead of having endemic counties, you have high incidence states and low incidence states. We have enough cases in the northwestern part of North Carolina to be high incidence, but it gets lost by these new definitions because the whole state has to be high incidence. I think it's a shame, and I think it's very unfortunate. It's not good for public health to have it that way, but that's the way it is now. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Great slides. So as Marcia mentioned, the slides will be available with the presentation. So next up, we have Dr. Heather Zalon from Ticknology, who is a research scientist and co-founder of Ticknology, and she's been a wonderful resource for TBC United and many organizations. We first met, I don't know, I think actually we met online first, and then connected up in
online meeting.
I know, another online meeting, and then we really connected at the Live Lyme conference in Colorado last year, and I'm so excited that she is part of our board at tbcunited.org. So with that, please welcome Dr. Heather Zalon, who's going to talk to us about tick testing.
Yeah. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. So thanks, Beth and Jennifer and the TBC United board members for hosting this webinar. So just to introduce myself, I'm the CEO and founder of Ticknology. And as a lab, we're focused on tick-borne disease detection, but we leverage those individual crowdsourced results to support a broader prevention and educational initiatives. So about 5 years ago, I became truly aware of the growing threat of tick-borne disease, and especially the growing number of Lyme disease patients. So currently, there's a real lack of standards in determining both the risk and the treatment for several tick-borne diseases, but especially cases where infections become chronic. One objective for us is to assist patients to become more proactive about their health after a tick bite. Next slide, please.
A little too far back.
There we go. So not all ticks are the same, and there's about 900 different species of ticks around the world. However, most people in the United States might experience encounters with approximately 10 different species. You're looking at the black-legged tick, the Lone Star tick, and the American dog ticks. They're responsible for the majority of tick bites and ultimately tick-borne illness here in the U.S. And each species, as you can see, has a different set of diseases associated with it and different geographical distributions. Can you head to the next slide, please, Jody? All right. So in general, ticks are responsible for 95% of vector-borne diseases, with Lyme being the most prevalent, followed by Anaplasma, Ehrlichia, Rickettsia, and Babesia. So these statistics are based on the reported diseases from the CDC website. And we know that most cases are either not reported, they're underreported, and so the real numbers are actually much higher than these. But what's alarming here is the steady climb of tick-borne illness since 2004. We keep reaching record levels, including 2017. And so even from 2016 to 2017, there's a 17% increase in Lyme and a 22% increase in tick-borne illness in general. Next slide. So the primary driver for this rise in illness is mostly due to the expansion and propagation of ticks throughout the United States. So you're looking at the distribution of black-legged ticks that carry Lyme, Anaplasma, Babesia, Ehrlichia, and others. And it's rapidly expanding beyond the northeast and north central foci, where 95% of the Lyme disease is reported. So there are several contributing factors to this. We've heard about deer populations being a problem. But you also have deforestation, you have creation of suburbs, climate change that's creating warmer winters, and of course the deer, where the black-legged tick has its last blood meal before she drops and lays eggs for the next generation. Next slide, please. So Lyme disease is grossly underreported, so this is a theme that we've been hearing for quite a while. And in fact, the true number of cases is likely to exceed 350,000 annually. Lyme can present in enough different symptoms, and it varies from person to person, and this variation includes both the onset of the disease as well as the appearance of a rash at the site of the bite. But early treatment with antibiotics will work for some people, but there's a subset of individuals, possibly 10 or 20%, where the infection will continue to persist. And there is no set diagnosis for post-treatment Lyme disease, and the treatment is controversial, which often isolates patients and their caregivers. So the solid statistics on the number of individuals with PTLD is lacking, but recent study coming out of Brown University proposed that this number could reach 2 million by next year. Next slide, please. So there are a number of ways you can reduce your risk of a tick bite. Stanford Health Department conducted a survey and found that 75% of tick bites occur around the home. So it makes sense to knock down the number of ticks around in your own backyard. You can integrate methods including landscaping, spraying, targeting rodents and deers on your property. You can also protect yourself by adopting a routine of personal protection measures and checking for ticks daily for prompt removal. Remember, prompt removal is the best type of removal because your risk of infection goes up the longer the tick stays attached. So no one plans on getting a tick bite, but it's important to have a plan in the event you or your child discover a tick. So we advocate a proactive approach rather than a reactive approach, which will help you prepare for potential health issues down the road. So saving your tick for identification and analysis will better prepare you for making those medical decisions and discussing your options with your doctor. Next slide, please. If you save your tick, you can have it tested to see if it's carrying any pathogens. So tick testing labs use a common method of detecting genes called PCR. PCR is very sensitive and involves an enzymatic reaction that seeks out and amplifies copies of specific DNA sequence. So as little as 10 or so copies can be detected in a single reaction. You're looking at a case where we've detected both Lyme and Babesia. So multiple pathogens can be carried and transmitted by a single tick. And in these cases in particular are potentially very complex clinically for diagnosis. Next slide, please, Jordan. So tick testing, just to kind of summarize, tick testing is a proactive approach for early detection of tick-borne disease. And Lyme disease is commonly misdiagnosed as multiple sclerosis, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, autoimmune diseases, and others. So your doctor may or may not want to treat a tick bite or may not recognize your symptoms. I've heard from patients even in high-risk areas such as New York and New Jersey, where their doctors are advising them to wait for the appearance of a rash before prescribing any antibiotics. So it's a good idea to have these discussions with your doctor beforehand during possibly your wellness visit in order to develop a plan in the event there's a tick bite in your family. And that's all I have. If you could head to the very last slide, I'd like to thank. So those are slides showing some of our initiatives with nonprofits, getting the word out and the data out, warning communities of tick-borne illness in their area. And this is a slide thanking all of those groups for all their hard work, helping us disseminate this information to their communities.
going to move across the country from Colorado to Arkansas now, and we have Dr. Tina Merritt, who is going to speak on alpha-gal syndrome recent research. And Dr. Merritt has actually had alpha-gal herself since 1979, so she is very extensively familiar with the consequences of it and how to deal with it. In addition, she was on the original research team with Platts Mills up in Virginia to be, on the first group that was on the founding discoveries of alpha-gal syndrome in the United States. So she has a very long and intimate history with it, and we're very grateful to have her here tonight speaking.
Does she have a slideshow?
Yes, it's up there.
Is that it?
That's the ones.
Oh, good.
Hi, I'm Dr. Tina Merritt, and I was going to try and emphasize mostly the newer findings with alpha-gal, but I was also going to discuss some of the symptoms of alpha-gal in case someone is new to this disease. So if you go to the introduction. And so I'm going to emphasize the newer things, but on the introduction side, it talks a little bit about sensitization to alpha-gal. And it's hypothesized to lead to an anaphylactic allergic response to beef, pork, and in some people milk. Started out as a reaction to a cancer drug. It's Tick-Borne. Can you hear me okay?
It's breaking up a bit.
Do you want me to switch to telephone?
No,
Yes.
I'm not sure why it's breaking up.
Okay. Well, if it doesn't work, let me know and I'll switch to the telephone.
Which, is this the correct slide?
So, can you go to the introduction?
Okay.
So the reactions were initially in the southern states, from Virginia, North Carolina, over through Tennessee, Arkansas, Oklahoma, and Missouri. And the reactions seem to correlate with the distribution of the Lone Star tick, or Amblyomma americanum. And the next slide is actually from Dr. Scott Cummins. He followed me in the research, and it's showing a picture with urticaria or hives. This patient received a challenge with pork sausage, and I believe it was several hours later that he had the 8 hours later. He had a reaction on his way home. So this is to depict the delayed reaction with alpha-gal. And my next slide is about symptoms. And the reaction, like I said, is delayed. It can be anywhere from hives to abdominal pain, diarrhea. They can have a drop in their blood pressure, breathing problems, and some people have full-blown anaphylaxis. My next slide has to do with the tick map in Arkansas, actually. So they had people send in their ticks, and they collected 5,000 ticks. And that's the distribution of the ticks that contain different infections. So Rickettsia, the main one with the red dots there. My next slide is the number of cases in the United States, which is a very difficult number to figure out. In 2018, the main laboratory that did the test, called Viracor Eurofins, they reported that approximately 58,000 people positive tests occurred in up to 2018, but this includes repeat testing. So in 1 year's time, they had 4,508 positive tests. So to assume that they had new diagnosed 15,580 people. The cutoff point for a positive test is 0.10, and this is significant because they previously had a positive of being 0.35. My next slide is from the main laboratory. This is the percent of positive tests that were sent in. So usually there's a history of hives or anaphylaxis. So in the Mid-South, 49% of the sample came back positive for IgE to alpha-gal. My next slide is actually from an article from Dr. Platts Mills, and it's discussing the possible cause, and he actually figured it out because he was bitten by ticks and he became more allergic to alpha-gal. And the assumption was that the tick would bite another mammal, but I'll talk a little bit about that in just a minute. If you can go to my next slide. It talks about determining a link between alpha-gal containing antigens in North America and an allergy to red meat. This is the study that Jennifer was talking about, where there were 2 species that actually produce alpha-gal in their saliva, and it's the Lone Star tick as well as the black-leg tick. And each blood doesn't have ticks, were still producing alpha-gal, so that's significant in that they don't have to bite another mammal first. And my next slide is the theory that Dr. Platts-Mills has about the delayed reaction. It's because when we absorb fat with meat, it goes into the lymphatic system in about 6 hours. And that's a slide showing how we break down the fat, and then the sugar that's alpha-gal gets tubed out to the outside part of this thing called a mycel, or a chylomicron, and that is where the reaction happens 6 hours later. Slide has to do with the role and the mechanism of alpha-gal in causing the reaction. So this is actually from another country, but they're talking about different mechanisms for IgE. So the ticks cause an IgE or allergic response, but other organisms usually cause us to be IgM or IgG, a different immune response to alpha-gal. So this is the first time that we've described an allergy to a sugar or a carbohydrate. And my next slide, this is from Dr. Platts-Mills, and he found an association of mild allergy to alpha-gal and atherosclerosis, and that was published this past year. Next slide. Significant in that it's from the ZMAP, where people report if they have alpha-gal. And if you'll notice down in the very southern states like Louisiana, Texas, Alabama, Georgia, there's much cases that this is due to the fire ants in that area eating the ticks, and so there's fewer ticks in that area. And then my other slides really have to do with the diet considerations. It's not just beef and pork, it includes natural flavoring. Some restaurants add mammal to their grease. My next slide has to do with the medications, which has been a very difficult problem. A lot of the vaccines have mammal products, a lot of the medicines have mammal products. And then my next slide is different resources that are available. There's numerous resources now, which is wonderful. We have a lot of support groups now on Facebook and on the internet, and a lot more education is getting presented out there, not just for patients, but also for physicians as well. Now they're actually presenting alpha-gal in medical schools, which I think is a big deal. And then in conclusion, in Arkansas, we've had thousands of people with positive IgE to alpha-gal. The symptoms include anaphylaxis, urticaria, angioedema, gastrointestinal symptoms. Some people even get atypical chest pain. We're not quite sure the cause, other than I think sometimes people inhale alpha-gal. And then the theory of the increase in this allergy, some people think it has to do with infections such as rickettsia in the saliva of these regional ticks, increased tick exposure, and then also sometimes exposure to pets. And then my disclosures are that I'm half owner on the patent for the alpha-gal. I'm also a chair on Tick-Borne Conditions United, and I'm a member of the alpha-gal task force. And our state representatives have this allergy, 100. And so that's and what we're seeing in this region is about 20% of people are coming up positive for alpha-gal. And I'm a founder of White Cell Inc., and it's a nonprofit educational organization. Thank you very much.
That was right. I heard the bell ringing right as she finished.
Excellent.
Excellent.
That was wonderful.
I know we're running just a couple of minutes behind, but I think we might be about to catch up. So the next presentation we have on the docket is the STARry Research Project, which Dr. Philip Sloan, MD, MPH from UNC is going to be speaking on, and I'd like to say a special thanks to him for coming. He just flew back from a trip to Korea about 24 hours ago, and so I think he's pretty jet lagged, but he was still gracious enough to accept the invitation to come to do this, and we are really excited, as Marcia said, Dr. Herman Giddens said, that there's very little we know about Starry, and we're happy to know that there's some research going on.
Well, thank you. First of all, I'll say I'm not an expert in tick diseases like some of the other people here, and so I expect to be corrected by several of my slides, and I see they are up, which is really fortunate. I also wanted to say something because there's a tendency to want to treat if you suspect Lyme disease, especially, and one of the areas of research we do is antibiotic stewardship, which has to do with the fact that use of antibiotics creates antibiotic resistance, and so we've got these issues around figuring out, can we diagnose better? And that's what this study is about. I was involved with the study 10 years ago for the CDC. I had set up a practice-based research network, and we had it was a lot easier to find Starry then than it is now, and we'll talk about that in a minute, why that is. But this is about that study. Okay, next slide, please. So these are various pictures of erythema migrans rash, and it is a rash that starts at the tick bite and then gradually spreads out. I guess there's some debate as to whether it has a leading edge which is redder than the center, but we tend to believe that, and we hear various versions of it. This is thought to be the herald rash for Lyme disease. Next slide, please. Now I'm probably going to get crucified for saying it's rare as a cause of erythema migrans in North Carolina, because it used to be. In fact, when we started the study in 2008, the previous study, the health department told us there was no Lyme disease. Yeah, but as we were doing the study, we heard from people who had Lyme disease, so we realized that was not true. But Lyme disease is pretty well known. There are tests for it. We know what the bacterium is. We know that the antibiotics are needed. The trouble is, next slide, that there's another condition that you cannot distinguish from Lyme disease when it begins. It has a rash that looks just like the Lyme disease rash, this erythema migrans rash, but nobody knows what causes it. Nobody knows what it's like if we don't give it antibiotics, because everybody gets doxycycline. And so we don't know if it really needs to be treated, and if so, what the best way is to do it. And so that's really what this study is about. Next slide, please. I was out in Fort Collins, Colorado for another reason, and I decided to stop by the CDC laboratory, and I discovered it's not on Google Maps. And it was very hard to find because they've got biological weapons there. And but that's Claudia Mullins, who is our project officer, who's given us the contract. And believe it or not, she's 40 years old. She looks like she's still young, but she's actually quite accomplished and very helpful. We have the next slide, because I think this is kind of interesting. Oh, I'm sorry, go back. There are two theories about the cause of Starry now, and they call it Starry instead of Starry. But anyway, there's somebody at the NIH who still believes that there's an organism we haven't found, sort of like Legionnaire's disease, and so they're looking for that. But the folks in Colorado are thinking now it's an allergic reaction of some kind of unusual type, and it may not be infectious at all. So if that's the case, it'd be nice to have a test that could identify kind of whether someone has Starry or whether they've got early Lyme disease. They have been working on that, and they have a test that's about 93% sensitive and 93% specific, which is getting towards something that might be clinically useful. And so they'd like us to get some more samples to help them refine that test. Next slide, please. So our study goal is to collect samples from patients likely to have Starry. Of course, they're likely to have Lyme disease just as well. And the samples will be analyzed by the CDC. The challenge is, obviously, if you've got a rash like this, you're going to want to be treated in case it's Lyme disease. And so we want to see people right away and gather specimens so they can get their treatment, because the CDC wants specimens from people who haven't been treated yet. Next slide, please. So we're trying to do it really quickly. We've got a 24-hour hotline that can do screening. We've got a number of practices that will arrange a visit within 12 to 24 hours. The first visit includes 2 little biopsies, blood and urine, $200 reimbursement for the patient, and then a follow-up visit 3 to 6 weeks later, blood and urine collection and another reimbursement. Next, just hit the button and we'll see. They love to get the tick. And we've heard the ticks just carry all kinds of disgusting things, and of course, obviously, it will help them a lot. And the trouble is, you don't get sick until a few days, after the tick bite. So I guess we've all got to start saving our ticks. Yeah, and put them in a bag. I got a call from somebody today. I said, put it in a bag and put it in the refrigerator, because that's what we asked for. And then we'll send them to the CDC. Next slide. We've got a little video. This is about 90 seconds, so if we play it, this will be online.
Thanks for listening to this short video that explains the star eye tick bite rash study. A certain type of tick, the Lone Star tick, is especially common in North Carolina. Its bite sometimes causes southern tick-associated rash illness, also known as star eye for each letter in the name. Unfortunately, not much is known about why star eye develops or how it should be treated. That's where you can help. The illness usually starts with a rash a few days after a tick bite. The rash begins at the site of the tick bite and gradually expands. It often ends up looking like a target. These photos show you that star eye rashes can differ somewhat, but always have a round appearance. The outer edge is typically red. The United States Centers for Disease Control and Prevention asked researchers at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill to help them learn more about star eye.
There's
so
an
that
error
they
in
can help
this.
find
It should
the
be
cause
forwarding.
and
It's
create a
not.
test to diagnose it.
I don't know why that is.
If you think you may have this type of tick bite rash, you may be eligible to participate in the star eye study. If you're eligible, you'll be asked to provide skin, blood, and urine samples once, and blood and
You
urine
can stop
gets
this
weeks
because
later.
it's, for some reason, the video and the sound and the screen are not in sync. I don't know why that is, but we've had all kinds of technical difficulties already. So we all should have the opportunity to experience that. Anyway, we have a phone number. That's
Put
a
the video on our website as well.
yeah.
Yeah, so people can get it at tbcunited.org.
Yeah, and it's on YouTube, so I can send you the YouTube link. So the link to the video is there, and the phone number is our 24-hour hotline, and we only have 2 cases so far that we've been able to actually do, and it's been quite surprising because either there's a lot less of this, but what we think is happening is people are more aware. They're more aware of Lyme disease, and as soon as they have a rash that's expanding, they want to jump on it. And so we want to see it as well, quickly. And so we thank you for anything you can do to help spread the word. We have little pocket cards for anyone in this room to take and keep in your wallet. And we also have some flyers out front. Thank you all.
Thank you.
And I'm not sure if you said this or not, but the study participants do need to be able to get to UNC with that. They have to be within a couple hours of UNC.
They have to be near UNC. We also have 2 providers in Chatham County who will also do the data collection for the
Central
study.
North Carolina.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Fly in from Arkansas, that's fine. But well, there's a lot of star eye in Missouri and Arkansas as well.
So thank you. So next up, I believe, do we have, oh good, okay, great. So next up, we are going to hear from Jeff Stouffer, who is the Chief Data Officer for the Live Lyme Foundation, and he's going to share a little bit of information about Tick Tracker and how that came about and why it's important, and the happenings of the Live Lyme Foundation, where Olivia Goudreau helped or created the whole app and the foundation. So I'll let him explain that a little bit better. We're very excited to have you here, Jeff. You can go ahead and get started.
Great, thanks for having me. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, good. I do have a few dogs, so I apologize if there's a couple barks here in the background. But yeah, essentially the Tick Tracker is one of the main education and awareness initiatives of the Live Lyme Foundation. If you can advance the first slide, please. And really, Live Lyme was started from a very brave young girl and what I call a mama bear. Her mom, Holiday Goudreau, and Olivia basically got the Live Lyme Foundation started because Olivia was, as she says, recruited by a tick. And it happened when she was early on in life. In the second grade, they started to see some signs and symptoms. And then over the course of a number of years, Olivia had seen 51 doctors. And eventually the 51st doctor diagnosed her with Lyme disease and also with, I believe, 4 other co-infections. And what that started to take a life on its own. And Olivia, had started to look at the impact that Lyme had on families and really wanted to do something about it. So she was in the process of getting the Live Lyme Foundation started, predominantly to assist in research as well as to assist children who can't afford their Lyme medications. And right around, as the foundation's kicking off, the foundation's a little over 2 years old now. Olivia was back on vacation, and they think that she had gotten bit in Missouri, but she was back out there several years later, and she went to go bring her dog in the house, and her dog Mo, they found 200 poppy seed ticks on Mo. And she went to go bring Mo in the house, and Mo basically, Holiday said, no way, keep Mo outside. And so they proceeded to go ahead and remove all the ticks from Mo. And Olivia had this idea. She said, hey Mom, where is it safe? Like where do all these ticks live? And how can we let people know where they're at? So if you can advance to our next one, please. And so essentially, Tick Tracker was born, and Olivia, along with our team, the Live Lyme Foundation is based in Denver, Colorado, but our app team is here in Columbus, Ohio. And together, what we started to see is there is this huge goal of uniting the citizen science and citizen scientists along with practicing scientists. And Olivia's whole goal with Tick Tracker was to really see if we can unite scientists together, citizens together, to go ahead and start to log and track ticks with the idea that it becomes a free global tool for education and awareness around ticks and tick-borne disease. And so what we started to do over time is to see where the data is coming from. Obviously, one of the main sources of Lyme data and tick data is the Center for Disease Control, the CDC. And the CDC team has been great in working with us to get the data that they have and make it publicly available. We have also worked with Heather and her team at technology. They've been great and have also started to provide us data that they have. And if you head to the next slide, and what we started to see, though, is that there's this challenge. There's this challenge that spans not only Lyme disease and not only humans, but also spans animals, both companion and livestock. A bunch of different organizations around the world, around the globe, we're both public and private, are tracking Lyme disease, tracking Bartonella, babesiosis, etc. And so we started to look at it and say, hey, let's go after the tick. Let's figure out where the ticks are, where this data is. And over time, we started to, as I had mentioned before, pull in all of this data and hopefully make it more accessible. One of the things that you'll see in the lower right-hand side, if you can't see it, is the data.gov, which is a government website that houses a fair amount of data, was down when the government shutdown happened. And so the reason that we put that up there is because a lot of this data sometimes lags behind, sometimes can be years behind the actual reporting of it. So what we really wanted to do is to bring that forward. And if you advance to the next one, please. And so what we decided with Olivia was let's take this One Health approach. And as the CDC said back in 2015, scientists estimate that more than 6 out of 10 infectious diseases in humans are spread from animals. So we really started to hone in on different data sets that we're starting to get around livestock, companion animals from veterinarians, or various different vet data sets. And the global collection of tick data started. So we started to have folks from Pakistan, from South Africa, Australia, Canada, Mexico, start to say, hey, we have data, and how can we get it to you? And if you advance to the next one, next slide, please. And really what's happened is everyone has pitched in from various different foundations to both national, regional, and state governments, private organizations, tick testing organizations like IGeneX and Technology, Galaxy, etc., and several other institutions that are either doing tick testing or doing various different testing around disease caused from ticks. So as part of this, all this data that's sitting out there, what we decided to do, if you go to our next slide, was to go ahead and create this engine. And it's not just an app, but what we did is behind the scenes, we're making and kind of structuring the data so it can be shared, it can be also embedded. These are just 2 examples. These are not live sites, but we just did this to illustrate the point. This shows kind of like all trails as an example, and then the National Park Service. We just picked the Chesapeake Bay. But the idea behind it is that the technology that we've built is built in such a way that other sites, other apps, other organizations can start to pull that technology into very visually based maps to show essentially the public where kind of hotspots are for ticks. If we head over to our next slide, this is just a quick example of what we've started to see within the first year of being live. And the app is live now in around the globe in both Apple or iOS and Android. And we're getting about 300 plus reports a month. And those reports vary. About 90% of them, it's a little bit less than that now, but about 90% of them are around sightings, 10% are around bites. So we have 2 different workflows that a user can go through. If they saw a tick, or if they were bitten, their dog was bitten, someone, a relative was bitten, they have the ability to go ahead and log and track those events. We're seeing a lot of engagement, which we really, really like. And that engagement is leading us towards kind of an average time of roughly between 15 and 25 minutes where that people are spending with the app. And they're not only just looking at the maps, but they're also looking at the various different types of ticks. The ticks that are currently being tracked range everything from what we call can't identify, all the way to some of our arch nemesis, the black-legged tick. And you can start to see a little bit of a distribution here in terms of how people are tagging different types of ticks. And we realize, since it's citizen science-based, that it's not 100% perfect. But if you look in the lower left-hand side, what we're starting to see is really nice data and images that are coming in. The image on the far left is a picture of a child that has a tick behind their ear, and they tag this as "I can't identify, it's just way too small." The next tick was very prominent in nature and had its markings, and it really resembled and was the American dog tick. And then finally, we started having folks tag the Longhorned tick, the East Asian tick that is starting to make its way across the West Coast and starting the East Coast, starting to spread towards the West. So we started to see some patterns there, just as they were announcing that the Longhorned was in the United States. And finally, last but not least, I just wanted to give everybody just a quick update on where we're going. We did work with the Health and Human Services team, and we're a part of essentially a winner within the Lyme track of what they call the Opportunity Project. And what we did is we were at the White House and presented there, as well as to the Department of Commerce and the Department of Census. And what over the course of this top project, what we did is we used our current app and started to gather additional feedback from our users. And so one of the things that we released as a result of it are heat maps. And so not only will you see the pinpoints, but we're starting to see kind of hot zones. We're starting to, over the course of the next several months, are going to be allowing users to slice and dice the data a little bit using their phone. And so they'll be able to look at different types of maps. They'll be able to apply filters by date, by tick type, and by data source. So you'll be able to go in and kind of select all these different layers, and then your maps will render differently. We're also in the process of putting out notifications. So if you've seen or used the app Waze, you know, the more crowdsourced and recency of geospatial data, we have the ability to give users in real time, using geolocation, real-time notifications that you know, several tick sightings and bitings have been spotted in their area. And then to the right, I am from Ohio, so I had to throw a barn in, but that's where our office is located. And when we were developing the app, we let one of our dogs out back, and that dog pulled back to, one was a deer tick, and then the other one was a American dog tick. And so we tagged them out back, if you see behind the cars over there. And we started to mess around with augmented reality, where depending on the geospatial data that we have, you'll be able to take your camera and walk around in real time and see where this various different data is located. And that's on the citizen side. On the scientist side, we started working with several scientists that are doing kind of organized and very kind of vetted tick drags. And so we've concepted out an app called Tick Tracker Pro that allows professionals who are doing active surveillance to log and track the surveillance areas, to input their data, and then ultimately to use artificial intelligence to hone in on kind of image recognition of what type of tick this is. With the overall goal that over time we're building a more and more robust and hopefully the world's largest database of ticks that researchers and citizens can kind of use together in different formats for ultimately for education and awareness. So I know I went pretty long, but we have a lot going on. Again, I really appreciate everyone's time and for inviting us to present tonight, and wanted to see if anyone had any questions.
Great, thank you, Jeff, very much for that.
That's fantastic. I love I know, right? The Tick Tracker Pro is fantastic for the physicians and professionals to have that information. The real-time video will be interesting to see when that comes out. Thanks. So now we are going to launch right into the Q&A, right? So perfect timing, Jeff. Thank you.
For questions. So if we have any from the audience or any from online.
Yes.
Yes.
Question for Dr. Merritt. She broke up a bit, and you indicated that 20% of your patients were positive for alpha-gal. What was the 20% number associated with?
So the original, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, the original clinical trial had to do with Erbitux, it's a cancer medicine, and the majority of the controls were in Tennessee, but of the controls, 22% were positive for alpha-gal IgE. So that means that in just that region, 22% were positive. Here's that seems to be pretty consistent. Now, the other slide I showed with a map from ViraCore, the laboratory, where it said 49% were positive, that was of the people with a history that the test was sent in by a doctor, that 49% came back positive. So that's, obviously not that high, but a positive history, 49% came back positive.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Did anything come in online?
Do you have any questions?
Go ahead. Yeah. Question
Yeah,
from
I
the
have a
gentleman.
question. I'm new to the area. I'm a doctor down in Miami and just moved up here and had my first encounter with a tick 2 weeks ago. And just trying to figure out, like, I hear so many different things that not being familiar with tick care and, this idea of 2 weeks or 3 weeks waiting before you even look for medical attention, to me seems pretty crazy. But that's what everything says. So when you look, it's like waiting to see the rash, waiting to feel the fever or nauseous. What's the standard acceptable protocol to just, because what I'm hearing is you saying no, but with everything that we've seen and what we're being told by urgent care centers or those kind of things is, wait 14 days to see if you get a target site rash. Well, I saw a rash there.
That's correct.
What's that?
That's correct. I've been bit by tick and
that's what they tell us, right?
That's what they tell you. It is not here. We will not even test you for Lyme. That's UMC.
And then also the concern of getting unnecessary antibiotics. So I'm also a big fan of not putting antibiotics into my body. So
Marcia,
now,
you want to take that question?
and the last part of that is the testing of the tick. So I had no idea that I have the tick, but to bring the tick somewhere and have it tested, and I would have loved to know a lot sooner and would have paid a lot of money to know that, which I'm fortunate that I could do that, but I would have liked to know if that tick that was in me for way too long, by the time we found it, if it was, what it was packing.
That was my question. And why won't they test?
I just want to say real quick, if while Marcia gets ready to answer that question, that if there are any of the live feed viewers that have any questions, to please write those right in and post your questions on the chat box.
Well, the tick testing is the easiest one to answer. The CDC, and I agree with the CDC on this, advises that testing the tick is not particularly useful as far as an individual making a decision or a medical provider on treatment. And there are a number of reasons of that. The test might be falsely positive, falsely negative. The person might have had another tick bite, because it's very common to have a tick bite that you don't know you had that actually makes you sick. So if you send the tick off for testing and say you get a negative response, you might be getting sick from another tick. So I don't think it is helpful to do tick testing for personal treatment decisions. I think it's very useful for research purposes. And there's nowhere in the state that does it. You can't take a tick anywhere in North Carolina. There are places you can mail them off to. It's expensive. And as I said, I personally would not do it because it would be a waste of money as far as I'm concerned. But you mentioned urgent care. Now, I get a lot of calls from the public in my role. And I do get some horror stories from people who have been to urgent care centers being told things that are completely incorrect.
We were just told not to come in until after 2 weeks.
Yeah, and see, that's terrible.
That's not, if you're not having symptoms, don't come.
But you can't get treated for every tick bite.
Right.
So I always tell people, and we'll see how Dr. Sloan feels about this. It's very difficult around here. You have 5 different kinds of ticks, practically a dozen diseases. you can't test for them right away because the body has not had time to react, even the ones that are bacterial and there's a test for. And that's another mistake that a lot of providers make, a lot of urgent care centers make. They will test a person who's come in with a tick bite, say the day before, and that is a waste of money and it's dangerous because the tests are going to be negative at that point. The CDC makes it very clear, especially with Lyme disease, you need to wait 10 days to 2 weeks to test. But you need to make a treatment decision before that, no matter what the tick-borne infection might be, because they're very dangerous to not treat. And so some people are going to be overtreated. And it's a problem with the worthy effort to not overuse antibiotics. Of course, on the side issue of that, one place that could really cut down on the use of antibiotics is in animals. I think when you're looking at tick-borne infections, it is better to overtreat than to undertreat. If you've got Rocky Mountain spotted fever, you could be dead by not being treated promptly. If you have Lyme disease, you can end up in bed the rest of your life, or dead.
But
There have been a number of sudden deaths from cardiac involvement with Lyme disease. So there's no easy answer. I call it Russian roulette. You get a tick bite. I get tick bites. I live in Chatham County. Nobody that lives here does not get a tick bite. I certainly don't want to get treated with every tick bite. So that's the Russian roulette part. You wait and see how you feel. And not everybody gets a rash from a tick-borne illness, and that is a really bad piece of information if somebody tells you to wait and see if you get a rash. Even with Rocky Mountain spotted fever, you don't always get a rash. So there's so much information out there, and unfortunately the medical providers are the source of quite a lot of it. And I'm sure that doesn't totally answer your questions.
Well, I mean,
it's very
the
difficult.
psychosomatic part of it too.
Yeah, because you worry.
Right.
Could also create every single one of those
Right.
symptoms. So
Exactly.
it's like what
That's the
it's a little
Russian,
bit
again,
like
the
you
Russian
said,
roulette part. It's very, very difficult.
So I'd like to add that the Tick-Borne Disease Working Group had put out a 108-page report that provided a bunch of recommendations to Congress for changes that needed to happen with the research and diagnostic tools and things like that. So a lot of that information needs to change, and all the CDC and everybody's aware of that, and they're working on that. We're fortunate that very quickly some information on alpha-gal actually got updated on the CDC website, but I'll say that is a very common question. That's a very common problem across the board everywhere we go. I live 30 minutes from the healthcare capital of the world, just outside of Boston. I had the classic ring. I had the tick embedded, and I was told, don't worry about it. I got sicker and sicker and sicker for 3 years, and I ultimately ended up going to see another physician and was tested positive for Lyme disease.
Where's that point of no return, like where
Yeah.
you're good? Because I see the chronic Lyme disease as a physical medicine, but
And
I don't see the acute. I definitely don't see.
I would say one of the most compelling recommendations out of the report was that for children who are bitten with a tick to immediately get treatment with doxy because of the risk for them acquiring rickettsia, or Rocky Mountain spotted fever.
Yeah.
So that's one that I think one of the biggest
Is there something that you can post so I can take it to UNC? Because I have fought with them over and over that. They will not.
They will not which
They won't treat you prophylactically, and they will not test you for Lyme.
If you have a tick bite and you come in with a tick bite,
Yes. I
Well,
will
if you
test it
get-
for everything but Lyme. They won't do it. They refuse. I don't understand
So
why.
we'll repost the recommendation, the report,
that specific
We can definitely-
section, that's the treatment, diagnosis and treatment.
some of the
That's
studies
something
and things
from
like
the
that, we'll
guys.
gladly do that.
Who
Yeah.
do you go to in Chatham County? So I mean, tell me, just point me in a direction, and I'll go that direction. I mean, I know you have to be careful, but no, just if you get, there's obviously medical care providers that seem to either believe that it doesn't exist or it's not going to pay attention to it. Where do you go to get? And you also don't want to go to the place that's far out in left field, but it's like where if urgent care is not going to
Before I answer the question, let me pose a question.
And I'm
to the-
new, so I don't have primary practice doc is a cardiologist down in Miami, so he doesn't know anything about ticks. So,
I want to pose a question to the group. If someone has a tick bite, what's the probability that they will get sick from it?
Well, who knows, because since
Or is it
since
100%?
no, of course not.
No.
That's
Or
why
is it
it's
50%?
Russian roulette. But then when the state fired the entomologist and all the work which was being done still wasn't satisfactory. What you really need is proportion of ticks tested to know how many are carrying whatever the disease is, which relates to your risk if you have a tick bite, of course, which also is related to how soon you've removed it. So there's no way to know. But I think my sense is the majority of time you're not at risk. Most of the time when a person gets a tick bite around here, they're not going to get anything. They're not going to get a disease. But you can't put a number on
Can
that.
I interject here? So I talk to a lot of people after they've had a tick bite, and I completely disagree with the recommendation that tick testing is not worth your time. I've seen time and time again where a positive result influenced that person's decision and influenced their conversations with their follow-up with their clinicians. So it's not just a tick test, you're also identifying the species of the tick that bit you. And the risk for transmission of certain diseases will be higher or lower depending on your personal circumstances of what tick bit you and whether it might be carrying disease. So if you have a young child that cannot take antibiotics, maybe a tick test will help you understand the risk and benefit with that sort of treatment. So I just had to say that for tick testing in general. Yes, you have to shop around for a reliable lab because it's not regulated like a clinical lab is yet, although I think it's probably moving in that direction. But I think tick testing and tick identification is a way of not having to play Russian roulette.
Thank you, Heather. I was just going to ask you, Tina, did you want to weigh in on this at all, being a physician yourself and seeing lots of patients as well?
Yes, I used to measure some tick diseases if I got a history, but the problem is there's so many. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
The problem is there's so many diseases that you have to kind of taper it to the history. So when I had a child that it was essentially a bullseye rash, I did the initial titers shortly after the tick bite, and what you're supposed to do is repeat the testing in 4 weeks. And Arkansas Medicaid would not pay for the testing. So I treated the child, his rash got better, he didn't get any more symptoms, he didn't get any fever or joint pain, but I never did know what he could have had because they wouldn't allow me to repeat the testing.
Hey, let me make a remark back to urgent care. They're not all urgent care places are like that. Some I see do a good job, so I don't want to blanket all urgent care centers. And to your issue with UNC, I don't know if they're saying I do still hear from reliable sources that people are seeing medical providers that are saying there is no Lyme disease in North Carolina. And
Yes.
what
Same
you
with
can do is
Arkansas.
go onto, for example, you can go onto our website, the Tick-Borne Infections Council of North Carolina. On our homepage, there is a link to the letter that the State Department of Public Health puts out saying there is Lyme disease in North Carolina.
Good.
You can acquire it in North Carolina, and it needs to be treated appropriately.
Is the
So
test like $1 bazillion or something? Is there a reason why they refuse to give it?
they don't want to do it
They don't want
because
to admit that there's
it's
Lyme.
so controversial and nobody quite knows what to do about it because you cannot test immediately. It's going to be negative. The body has not had time to mount antibodies to the bacteria. So,
Right, but if I've
there-
had chronic
there's a
issues,
test called
why
a
not
Western
do it?
blot, and it does several different antibodies. And some of them are IgG, which means an old infection, and some are IgM, which means a current infection. So I usually do the Western blot. I think it's about $600, and then I repeat it in 4 weeks.
Yeah, just a couple of points about kind of response to infections. the body puts out antibodies, first IgM, and it takes, 7 to 10 days before they'll be positive in most infections, and then IgG comes up, 4 to 6 weeks. So we test for that. If you test too soon, obviously the antibodies won't be there. The other thing that's worth thinking about is doxycycline is not a cidal drug, which means it doesn't kill. It just stops something from growing, and it's usually the body's antibodies that then kill the thing. And so some could argue that if you give doxycycline too early, then the antibodies haven't developed to help it kill the. So it's a bit more complicated than like we have something that kills. We're just withholding it.
I guess my specific question is, going through years of trying to figure out what's wrong with me. Lyme, repeatedly, over and over. No, I'm not testing. I'll test you for this and this and this and this, but I'm not going to test you for Lyme.
Well, as I said, I think
Why?
part of what I see is that Lyme disease is so controversial that a lot of medical providers are reluctant to get into the controversy. And one way not to is to just pretend
But if
it's
I
not.
do have a Tick-Borne
It's kind of nice to listen to the patient, don't you think?
Yes.
Yeah.
and I do have a tick-borne illness, and I do have it from a tick that is now.
Well, I believe you, but I'm just
So
saying
why-
it's a controversy because, for example, the doctor that was run out of the state basically by the medical board, there is one under investigation to follow the CDC, Infectious Disease Society of America protocol. They are quite liable to get in trouble. And even if you have a provider that's going to follow it, they're nervous. For example,
Questions from online that we're going to try to answer real quickly, and then we're going to wrap it up. But I think that the presentations and the discussion are very, there are so many different challenges, whether it's data collection, surveillance of ticks, what are they carrying, how long did it take for people to get them, how good are the tests. There's so many different levels of questions. One question from the field, and I think, Heather, this is going to be for you. If you freeze a tick, how long can it be frozen and still be good for testing?
The freezer's a good place for long-term storage, and we rely on DNA staying intact to do the test. So anywhere from months to possibly years. A good lab, though, will have standards to test the integrity of the DNA to determine whether the DNA is still healthy enough to draw any conclusions from the test. But I would say months to years in the freezer.
Thank you. And then the final question is, what can people like me that live in other states like Missouri do to get studies, research, and awareness in our medical fields and with our physicians? As of now, a lot have not even heard of it. So, and that's where having nonprofit groups in your state can really help with that education, being a go-to point. But I say historically, and that's one of the reasons that we've got TBC United started, is that there's not as much education and advocacy going on in the southern half of the country because it's, these diseases are only starting to come to the fore now. So I would say stay tuned. I'm glad that you signed up for the webinar, and you're going to be on our mailing list so we can reach out to you and try to coordinate with that. I actually am from Northwest Arkansas and grew up very close to Missouri as well, so I know that that's a hot spot in the universe of tick-borne illnesses and conditions. So.
And we have some things coming up at TBC United, so again, stay tuned. That'll answer and address some of those questions and concerns where we'll help you help yourself within your community and provide that input out to your community. So thank you. All right, so that about wraps it up for the evening. I just want to say, thanks for everybody being here tonight. And definitely, check us out on social media, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, soon YouTube. And please mark your calendars for some upcoming events. You can look at tbcunited.org on the events tab. You'll see other events coming up all around the country that we're going to be involved in or that we're supporting in some manner. Next one being, for those of you here in the audience with Alpha-Gal and online, The Martinsville, Virginia group's going to have, from Virginia Tech, is going to have their second annual conference on alpha-gal. And so thanks to
That's
Lisa
on
Martin
August
on
24th.
August 24th. Yep, thank you very much.
Yeah. And then a couple other things really quickly. I mentioned earlier about tickwarriors.com. It's our anniversary birthday special celebration this week. So we are having a special code on the website. If you order online at tickwarriors.com, you can enter the code 3 years for a 13% discount, and that will be through the end of June, I believe.
So that code
check
is
that out.
3 years. The
Yes.
number 3 years.
YEARS.
Yep.
And last but not least, please, we do ask again for you to remember to support us in your charitable giving, and by going to tbcunited.org/donate.
So it's funding like that helps us produce the materials that go out to your physicians and to organizations like Scouts of America, and just, you know, the different conferences that we're at. They are gobbling the information up. They don't know about it. They want to know more about it. And like I said, after the conferences, the backlash that we're getting is it's great. You know, they're looking for that information statewide, state to state. So you know, it takes money for us to fly around to those places. Sometimes there's fees involved in attending the conferences. Definitely the crew here tonight did a fabulous job again. There's funding that comes to that, you know, that's involved with that. So we really do ask for your support. You know, every dollar counts. So thank you. So with that, we always say.
I thought it was I don't remember right now.
So yeah, you know, thank you very much for being here and tuning in. We will follow up with a link.
Yes, we'll have a link to the website. If there are any other questions that come in, we'll make sure to run them by all the speakers and have a list of questions and answers for any other close-up out of this evening's conversation.
Yeah, the edited version will be sent out.
Yes, and the video as well. Stay tuned for more. Thank you all so much.
Thanks everybody.
for
Thanks
coming.
all our speakers. Thank you.